What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel. It is time to give you a recap of Week 11 of the 2024 college football season. And what a weekend it was. It did not disappoint. So many great games once again here as we officially completed the second weekend of the month of November. And the upsets did play out. Of course, we did see some upsets last weekend, but I feel like we saw more upsets this week. I'm going to get into the upsets here as we go into these five biggest recaps, but just not a very big disappointing college football weekend. Week 11 was a very exciting weekend, especially for some conferences, and conference races are still heating up. We had the first playoff rankings out, from last week on Tuesday, so it is now starting to build pressure here for some of these teams. So let's go ahead and get into my five biggest recaps here from Week 11, and we'll start with my number 5 biggest recap. I just talked about it, chaos in Week 11. So we saw a lot of chaos here in Week 11. How about the Big 12, though? I'm going to start with this game. How about Kansas upsetting Iowa State? So Iowa State's now lost back-to-back games. A Kansas team that was like 2-6 going into this game. I really kind of, maybe expected maybe like a little bit of an upset, but not very like a big chance that Kansas would pull off the upset here. But we saw like a 3-5 Houston team upset, a 7-1 Kansas State team. So yeah, that's back-to-back weeks now that Iowa State and Kansas State have both lost as like 7-win teams. But Kansas State had a bye week, so we can't really talk about them that much. But yeah, this was probably the biggest upset here in the Big 12 from just last night. They beat Iowa State here. The Jayhawks beat Iowa State 45-36. It was a high-scoring game. The Jayhawks had a big lead early in this game, and it looked like Iowa State could probably come back in this one. But yeah, the Jayhawks do prevail. The offense was just overall very explosive, and the pressure really started to build for a lot of these teams. After the first playoff rankings, I feel like some of these teams that were not ranked in the playoff and maybe are not having the best season, they were probably saying, yeah, we're going to ruin their season as much as we can, and that's what we got here in the Big 12. So I don't think Iowa State now really has a chance here to make the college football playoff still. Even if they went out and go like 10-2, they could still make it to the Big 12 championship, but they got 2 conference losses now, and then you got Kansas State also with 2 conference losses. So now you got BYU and Colorado sitting at the top. BYU survived on the road at Utah 22-21. That was another big game there. BYU almost going down for their first loss of the season, but they do survive like they always do in some of these big games. This BYU team has kind of reminded me of the team of TCU from a couple of years ago, where they just survive really close games and they don't really play that well. But BYU, they do prevail 22-21, and then you look at Colorado beat Texas Tech 41-27. So yeah, it's looking like Colorado versus BYU in the Big 12 championship, and the winner probably does get that number 4 spot in the playoff. But Colorado, they were kind of far, they were kind of far behind in the playoff rankings, but no matter what, if they're like ranked really far back, they're still going to get in there as a top 4 Power 4 conference champion. So yeah, we saw a lot of chaos here in Week 11, but I wanted to mention the Big 12 a little bit more. We also saw Pittsburgh go down to Virginia in the ACC. So yeah, just more and more chaos here as we go into Week 12, and the first 2 weeks of the month of November have been very exciting to watch. So I kind of hope it kind of continues that way going the rest of the way forward, because this is what college football is all about. You'll see some upsets play out, and you'll see some upsets that are very close. But that is my number 5 biggest recap, chaos in Week 11. Let's now move on to number 4. This is not a big recap here, but Indiana versus Ohio State is going to be a showdown. So we finally get Indiana versus Ohio State this weekend, both teams. You look at Indiana, they are now 10-0. Who saw that coming? Indiana is also kind of the, same kind of like TCU team that we saw a couple years ago make like a Cinderella run. TCU a couple years ago was very underrated coming into the, 2022 season. And Indiana also was also the same thing. And Indiana is undefeated at 10-0. How about their win over Michigan 20-15? I think, this was the toughest defense that Indiana went up against all year long, because they really haven't played any, like, really quality teams. Like, they played some solid teams here and there, but they haven't really played like a really, really good defense, and that's what they got here against Michigan. Now, we know that Michigan's offense is not really explosive like it has been, this year compared to the last few years when Jim Harbaugh was there. But Indiana's defense was the difference in this game. That really was the difference here for the Hoosiers. So Indiana does prevail. They have their first 10-win season, their first 10-0 start in program history. So Indiana gets a big win over Michigan, 20-15. And then Ohio State on the other side took care of business against Purdue, 45-0. So Ohio State had a pretty easy win. And I think that was really good for Ohio State. They did not overlook, that Purdue team, and they were not focused on this Indiana team for this weekend, so that's the good news here for both of these teams. But yeah, this is going to be a showdown here between the Hoosiers and the Buckeyes, a game that probably decides who meets Oregon in the Big Ten Championship. I would be very shocked here if Indiana actually wins this game, because if Indiana does pull off a huge win on the road at Ohio State, they definitely are going to be the most surprised team in all of college football this year, and they could still make the playoff as well. So Indiana and Ohio State is shaping up to be a showdown, and I can't wait for this game. Can't wait to watch it. I'll see what the spread is looking like here for this game, and I'll make a prediction on this game for this Thursday. But as of right now, my prediction is Ohio State to win it, maybe by a couple of touchdowns, 10 to 14 points, somewhere in that range. But I don't want to give away my prediction too early. But as of right now, I do favor Ohio State in that game, so that's my number 4 biggest recap. Number 3, down goes Miami. So this is my number 3 biggest recap. We saw Miami go down this weekend. Miami loses their first game of the regular season. They now drop to 9-1. And now the ACC is really wide open. It's now really controlled by SMU. SMU hasn't lost a conference game. And who saw that coming? SMU, a newcomer in the ACC, is now the front runner. I don't believe it. I mean, I really didn't think SMU would be that front runner going into this point. Now, you look at Miami, we saw them, of course, the rest of the way, the schedule kind of set up well for them, but this was kind of their last kind of tough competition. Georgia Tech was not a bad 5-4 team heading into this game, and I did say that Georgia Tech has given Miami some problems in the past, and that's what they did in this game. We saw Georgia Tech's defense put a lot of pressure on Cam Ward that we haven't really seen all year. Cam Ward's been under pressure a lot, but he is somehow to make a very explosive play out of that under pressure, but he didn't really do that in this game. They did sack Cam Ward a bunch of times in this one. And Georgia Tech's offense, they pretty much ran the football down Miami's throats. That was pretty much the difference there in this game. Georgia Tech definitely was more of a running attack team instead of being more of a passing attack team. And Haynes King actually ran the football pretty well in this game, and the running backs did their job. The defense did their job as well. Now, I think Miami made a mistake in that third quarter. Remember, they scored that touchdown, and they had a chance to probably make it like a 21-17 ball game. Instead, they go for the 2-point conversion, so that's a big mistake there from the coaching staff. They probably should have just gone for the extra point because it was still the third quarter by that time. And, heading into the fourth quarter, they had plenty of time to come back in this game. So I just don't understand why Miami had some struggles here against Georgia Tech. It's been going now for the last few years. It seems like Mario Cristobal cannot beat this Georgia Tech team. And, this kind of, same thing happened last year. So yeah, Miami goes down this week, and again, you look at the ACC now, we saw Pittsburgh go down to Virginia. It looks like Clemson and SMU are now the, two teams that can meet for the conference championship. I think Miami, though, for them to get in, I think SMU probably has to have a loss somewhere, but you look at SMU's schedule the rest of the way, even though it's been chaotic already here in the month of November, SMU could probably lose a game, but are they going to still get in there as the ACC championship contender? I really don't know, but this is about Miami here in this video. Miami goes down for the first time this year. They lose their first game of the season, and again, it's against the team that they've been struggling for the last few years in Georgia Tech. So a big win here for Georgia Tech. That is my number 3 biggest recap. Down goes Miami. Number 2 recap, Alabama showed no mercy. And when I say no mercy here in this number 2 biggest recap, I mean it. Alabama went on the road in Death Valley at LSU in a night game with over 100,000 fans, and they showed no mercy in this game the whole entire way. You look at Alabama, the way they pretty much, played this game. The running game was really strong on the offensive side of the football, but I think it was mainly their defense that really made the difference. You look at the defense, it looks like Alabama's defense is a lot more better compared to the first half of the season. They were giving up so many big points in the first half of the year, but it seems like the last couple of games, Alabama's defense has come alive. They were really impressive against Missouri a couple weeks ago, or I should say 3 weeks ago, because they had a bye week before playing LSU, and then, of course, they come out of the bye week, and it looks like the defense has improved a bunch. And, the defense was flying all over the place. They were pressuring Garrett Nussmeier at quarterback, and they just really stopped the running game for LSU. So this was not even a close game whatsoever. I mean, it was obviously a big game. It was like the game of the weekend in the SEC. But Alabama went in there in Death Valley, and it's always a tough place to play at nighttime in Death Valley. And, this kind of reminds me of the Clemson and Louisville game from last week. I mean, Louisville beat Clemson on the road in Death Valley at night. Now you got Alabama that did the same thing here to LSU at nighttime. So, yeah, how does that happen? But, Alabama showed no mercy. I was really impressed with Jalen Milroe's performance, especially with his running legs. Like I said, 4 rushing touchdowns. That is unbelievable. And Alabama looks like they could be a dangerous team here the rest of the way. They've had a couple of losses, some tough losses this year, but this is an Alabama team that people were starting to give up after the Tennessee game, but after the Missouri game, also after this game, I feel like Alabama is still in this thing. They could still make that college football playoff as an at-large team, but you look at the SEC race, you still got Texas A&M, that's probably the front runner now. Then you got, LSU with 2 losses. Georgia just lost their second game in conference play, so I don't think there's a path for both of those teams in the SEC championship, but you got Tennessee still alive, and then Texas also still alive. So it's looking like those 3 front runners in the SEC. But Alabama, it's mostly about them. They showed no mercy in this game against LSU. And again, they have no respect here whatsoever for the Tigers. That is my number 2 biggest recap. And then number 1, we're still in the SEC. Ole Miss is still alive in the playoff race. So Ole Miss and Alabama are still alive in the playoff race, but we're talking about Ole Miss here now. They're still alive in this thing. Ole Miss might have a chance to win out, go 10-2, and make it to the playoff as an at-large team. I mean, they'll probably not be that high in the playoff rankings. I'm not sure where the committee is going to rank this team after their big win over Georgia, but I'm assuming it's going to be really high, and they should be ranked over Georgia, to be honest. But you look at Ole Miss in their game against Georgia, they were definitely clearly the better team in this game. You look at Jackson Dart, he got hurt in this game in the first quarter, turned the ball over. The weather conditions were definitely a big factor for both of these games. Ole Miss and, Georgia, and then, of course, Alabama and LSU. Both of these games were like the biggest games of the weekend. Both games had raining conditions and everything, but yeah, Ole Miss's defense, I feel like, was the difference in this game as well compared to the Alabama and LSU game. But yeah, Georgia really struggled on offense. We've seen their struggles this year on the offensive side of the football, but they got off to a pretty good start. The defense forced the turnover, and, Georgia took advantage a little bit early in this game, but then Jackson Dart got hurt, and then Austin Simmons comes off the bench, leads them down the field for a touchdown, and then after Jackson Dart came back in this game, this secondary for Georgia could not stop these receivers of Ole Miss, and that was definitely the difference as well. These receivers for Ole Miss were big. They made some explosive plays of 10-plus yards, and yeah, Ole Miss definitely was clearly the better team here. So a huge win here for Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin gets his first win versus a top-5 opponent after being 0-4 the previous year. So yeah, Ole Miss, a huge win here. Now you look at Ole Miss the rest of the way. They got a chance here still to make the playoff as an at-large team. They may not make the SEC championship, but they could still somehow get in there as a 10-2 team. Depending on what happens here, maybe between Indiana and Ohio State, and maybe Alabama probably slips up somewhere, but I think we could see both Ole Miss and Alabama in the playoffs. So, yeah, Ole Miss is still alive in the playoff race. So is Alabama. But, again, I was really impressed with both Ole Miss and Alabama. And, again, their difference was their defenses. They both played pretty well against, really good offensive teams. Georgia may not be the best offense in the country. But, yeah, the defense looks like it's getting better for Ole Miss and Alabama. So that is my number 1 biggest recap. Ole Miss is still alive in the playoff race. And those are my 5 biggest recaps from Week 11 of this 2024 college football season. Things are going to get interesting here as we head into the last couple weeks of this 2024 season. Let me guys know what you think about Week 11. Was an exciting weekend of college football, or it was just more chaotic? Let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on my Lucas Ross Sports YouTube channel.